Aisha Thompson had always been the type of woman who calculated everything: her rent, her bills, even her caffeine intake. But today was different. Today she allowed herself a luxury, a rare indulgence, a first-class seat on a cross-country flight from New York to Los Angeles. She sank into the buttery leather chair, feeling the gentle hum of the engines beneath her and the subtle vibration that promised speed, efficiency, and perhaps a touch of glamour. Outside the oval window, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white as the plane taxied down the runway. This was her moment of quiet triumph, the reward for years of meticulous planning, extra shifts, and careful savings. The flight attendants moved gracefully through the cabin, offering pre-flight drinks. Aisha had chosen ginger tea, her small comfort in a life that often felt too harsh and unforgiving. She inhaled the warm, spicy scent, letting it settle into her chest, and opened her tablet to a bookmarked novel she had been dying to finish. The seat reclined perfectly, her feet rested on the expansive legroom, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to breathe fully. She was here, in a world of luxury that often felt reserved for others. And then, without warning, everything shattered. A tap on her shoulder jolted Aisha upright. She looked up, blinking against the cabin lights. Standing over her was a flight attendant, his face tight, eyes sharp. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," he said, voice polite but rigid. Aisha blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Excuse me, come with who?" "Please gather your belongings," he replied, ignoring her question. His tone carried no warmth, only an insistence that made her stomach twist. The nearby passengers had started to notice. A woman with a child in the next row craned her neck, eyebrows raised in concern. A businessman in a tailored suit glanced over from his laptop, suspicion clouding his eyes. Aisha felt suddenly exposed, as though a spotlight had illuminated her in front of an audience she hadn't asked for. Her first-class sanctuary was vanishing, replaced by a stage of scrutiny and whispers. Her hands trembled as she collected her small bag and jacket, heart hammering against her ribs. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though the words sounded loud even to her. The attendant's lips pressed into a thin line. "Please just follow us." Two other staff members appeared, flanking her like silent guards. Their eyes were trained forward, unyielding. They didn't speak, but the message was clear. Resistance was not an option. Aisha's mind raced. She had her ticket, her ID, her boarding pass, all valid, all in order. She had done nothing wrong, yet every step she took toward the galley felt like walking into a nightmare she could not wake from. The cabin air, once warm and comforting, now felt suffocating, thick with tension and judgment. Passengers whispered, "What's happening?" A young man muttered to his companion, who shook her head, frowning. Cameras flickered, phones raised casually at first, then pointed directly at her. Aisha felt a strange, growing heat crawling up her neck, her cheeks flushing with humiliation. This was not just a misunderstanding, it was a spectacle. As she was escorted through the narrow aisle, the first-class passengers parted slightly, leaving a corridor of curious eyes and hushed speculation. Some stared with disbelief, others with irritation, and a few with a quiet sympathy that made her stomach knot even tighter. The flight attendant's hands were firm but professional on her elbows, guiding her toward the back of the cabin, toward the galley that suddenly seemed like a place of judgment rather than safety. Her thoughts spun. Was this a case of mistaken identity, some absurd policy she had unknowingly violated? She opened her mouth to ask again, but the staff cut her off. "Please, step aside here." Their voices were calm, but the tension behind them suggested that they, too, were uncomfortable with what was unfolding. The murmurs grew louder, a chorus of speculation filling the air. Some passengers were clearly recording, others whispered to their neighbors, shaking their heads in disbelief. Every step Aisha took felt like a march under a microscope, her dignity stripped away with each glance. She caught sight of herself in the reflective metal wall of the galley, her own pale, wide-eyed face staring back at her, a mix of anger, fear, and disbelief she had never expected to see. A sudden thought hit her. This moment could explode online. Social media would feast on it, hashtags would trend, comments would pour in, half sympathetic, half venomous. Aisha felt a cold shiver down her spine. She had worked tirelessly to build a life of independence and respect, and now, in the span of seconds, she was being paraded before strangers with no explanation, no justification, no chance to defend herself. And then she heard it. An announcement over the cabin intercom, crisp and precise, slicing through the whispers and the low hum of the engines. "Ms. Thompson, please remain calm. The CEO of the airline will address this personally." Aisha froze. The words seemed to hang in the air, impossible, surreal. Her pulse quickened, disbelief warred with rising curiosity. She had heard the rumors of executives appearing mid-flight, rare, nearly mythical occurrences, but she had never imagined she would be at the center of such an event. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder, passengers craning their necks, whispering, glancing toward the galley. Her heart thudded against her ribs. Was this real? A mistake? A cruel joke? The staff, usually in control, now looked uneasy, glancing at one another nervously. Something bigger than a simple seating dispute was unfolding, something that reached far beyond her ticket or her first-class seat. And as Aisha's mind raced, the metallic doors of the galley slid open, and a tall figure in a crisp, dark suit appeared. The cabin seemed to hold its collective breath. Every eye turned toward the man, and even the flight attendants stiffened, as though a higher authority had entered the room. He stepped forward with calm authority, yet there was an unmistakable softness in his gaze as it met hers. The murmurs of the cabin seemed to fade, replaced by a tense, electric silence. "Ms. Thompson," he said, his voice steady and commanding, yet carrying a weight of sincerity. Aisha's breath caught. She didn't know whether to feel relief, fear, or sheer disbelief. The man's presence radiated power, influence, and, most unexpectedly, concern. She realized in that moment that her life, her dignity, her story, was about to collide with the top echelons of corporate authority in a way she had never imagined. And then, as the murmurs rose again, and cameras flickered in anticipation, she felt a single question press itself against the edge of her mind. Why was the CEO of the airline personally intervening? And what did he want with her? Aisha's pulse raced so violently she thought the cabin might feel it. The CEO, David Hargrove, if the flight attendant had spoken correctly, was standing a mere few feet away, the man whose very name carried authority, power, and influence. His tailored suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted, yet it was his eyes, calm, intense, almost human, that froze her in place. He didn't look like a corporate puppet reading a prepared statement. He looked like someone who had genuinely come to understand something, and perhaps someone who was about to set it right. "Ms. Thompson," Hargrove said again, his voice measured, "please follow me for a moment." Aisha's mind screamed contradictions. Part of her wanted to bolt back to her seat, to reclaim the comfort and control she had worked so hard for. But another part, the part that had sensed the growing chaos, the flashing cameras, the whispers like wildfire, knew she had no choice. If this was a miscommunication, it had escalated into something far bigger than a mere seat dispute. She gathered her courage and followed him toward a slightly secluded corner of the cabin, just beyond the galley. The flight attendants lingered nearby, whispering to each other, casting furtive glances at the unfolding scene. Aisha's stomach churned. Her limbs felt heavy, her heart hammering in a rhythm that made her question if she might faint. "Ms. Thompson," Hargrove said quietly, ensuring no one else overheard, "I want to apologize for this situation. I understand it has been humiliating and confusing, and I want you to know this is not acceptable." Aisha's mouth went dry. Why is this happening to me? I have a first-class ticket. I did everything correctly." Her voice wavered, barely audible over the soft hum of the plane's engines. Hargrove's jaw tightened subtly and he exhaled almost a sigh of regret. "You're right. You did everything correctly. There was a miscommunication, a mistake. but the way it escalated, it should never have reached this point. Aisha's mind reeled. Miscommunication, mistake. That hardly seemed enough explanation for what she had endured. The whispers, the stares, the cameras. The public spectacle of a single woman being led from her seat, every passenger's eyes on her, and now the CEO himself intervening. Passengers in first class were beginning to murmur again, some craning their necks to watch, some filming surreptitiously. A young couple whispered to each other, glancing at Aisha with curiosity and concern. A man in the row behind smirked, phone already recording. Aisha felt exposed, every heartbeat magnified by the tension in the air. Hargrove leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I want you to understand something. The airline failed you today, not the staff directly, but our system, our procedures, our oversight, we failed. And that's on me." For a moment, Aisha's anger surged, a wave of frustration, humiliation, and incredulity all at once. The injustice of the situation struck her so sharply she felt a sting behind her eyes. Her first instinct was to recoil, to demand to be returned to her seat immediately. But then she noticed something in Hargrove's eyes: sincerity, authentic concern. No rehearsed PR lines, no corporate mask. She began, but words faltered in her throat. Hargrove continued, voice calm but firm. "I want to ensure that this is corrected. And I want you to know, Ms. Thompson, that you have my personal attention. I am going to make sure that no one else is subjected to this, ever." Aisha's chest tightened. Relief brushed against her anger like sunlight through storm clouds, but doubt lingered. How could she trust a corporation that had humiliated her in front of dozens of strangers, that had ignored her questions, that had treated her as if her dignity were negotiable? Before she could respond, another flight attendant approached, eyes darting nervously. "Sir, the cabin is getting restless. Some passengers are recording in." Hargrove nodded, not breaking eye contact with Aisha. "I am aware. Let's proceed carefully. We will not escalate further." Aisha swallowed hard. The words "proceed carefully" did nothing to calm the whirlwind in her chest. Every eye on the plane felt like a judgment, every phone camera like a magnifying glass dissecting her. She could feel herself being measured, evaluated, analyzed. She looked out the window, the city below shrinking as the plane climbed higher, the clouds painting a surreal backdrop of gold and pink. She had never felt so small, yet so visible all at once. Her life, her story, her identity. It was now on display, unasked, in front of strangers and strangers' cameras, her every expression a narrative for the world to consume. "Ms. Thompson," Hargrove said softly, almost as if reading her thoughts, "I want to hear from you. Tell me exactly what happened from your perspective." Aisha took a shaky breath, her fingers curling into fists. "I was in my seat. First class, I had my ticket, my boarding pass. I don't understand why I was being removed. I didn't do anything wrong." Her voice trembled, frustration spilling into fear. Hargrove listened, nodding subtly, absorbing every word. The tension in the cabin seemed to heighten, passengers sensing the gravity of the encounter. Some whispered, others shot furtive glances at their phones, anticipating the fallout. Aisha felt the walls of first class close in, yet she also felt an unexpected shift. Someone in power was actually listening. "I understand," Hargrove said, voice low, yet carrying the weight of authority and empathy. "And I assure you we will make this right. You will not be dismissed, humiliated, or ignored. You are absolutely correct. This should never have happened." A hush fell over the cabin. The murmurs quieted as passengers sensed the CEO's presence, a mix of awe, curiosity, and disbelief rippling through the rows. A few whispered to each other, the CEO himself, mid-flight. Others adjusted their phones, filming discreetly. Aisha's emotions collided violently: anger, fear, humiliation, and the tentative spark of relief. Yet beneath it all lingered a gnawing uncertainty. What did making it right truly mean? Could an apology, no matter how sincere, undo the spectacle she had endured? Could it erase the way she had felt, paraded like a character in someone else's story. Before she could voice these questions, the plane's intercom crackled. "Attention, passengers. The situation with Ms. Thompson is being addressed by the highest authority on board. We ask for your patience and respect." The words seemed to hang in the air, charged with electricity. Aisha's heart pounded. She knew this story was far from over. Every passenger, every whisper, every raised phone was a reminder that her ordeal was both intensely personal and now undeniably public. And as Hargrove placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm, Aisha realized the moment had shifted. She had survived the initial humiliation, but the storm was not yet over. Something larger was unfolding, and the world was watching. Her stomach twisted with anticipation, fear, and a strange flicker of hope. The question echoed relentlessly in her mind. Why had the CEO personally come? And how far would he go to correct what had gone so horribly wrong? Aisha sank into a slightly quieter corner of the galley, but the world outside that small space refused to soften. Phones remained raised, whispers persisted, and the soft hum of the plane's engines no longer felt soothing. It was a reminder of how high she was, both literally and figuratively, from the ordinary life she had left behind. Her heart was still hammering, a relentless drum in her chest, while the enormity of the situation pressed down on her. She had always believed in the quiet dignity of hard work. A promotion earned, bills paid on time, respect won through effort. But none of that mattered in the surreal moment she found herself in. A first-class seat, a simple ticket purchased months ago, had become a stage for a public humiliation she had not signed up for. And now, the CEO of the airline was standing in her midst, wielding authority that both comforted and terrified her. David Hargrove remained calm, his posture both commanding and unthreatening. His presence was magnetic, yet it carried weight, a sense that he could bend the rules of the entire airline with a single decision. He leaned slightly toward her, lowering his voice further. "Ms. Thompson, I need your honesty. Did anything happen before boarding that might have caused confusion? Please tell me everything." Aisha hesitated, her mind spinning through every interaction she had had. Check-in, security, the boarding process, her seat assignment. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing had suggested this nightmare. Yet she felt the weight of every eye in the cabin, every whisper, every tiny camera lens waiting to catch a misstep. I don't know," she admitted, voice barely audible. "I boarded. My ticket was fine. I didn't do anything wrong. I don't understand why this is happening." Her hands shook slightly as she clutched her bag, knuckles white. Hargrove nodded slowly, as if absorbing each word like a puzzle piece. "Then this is entirely on us. That's important for you to know." His sincerity struck her, a small ember of relief in the storm raging in her chest. Just as she was beginning to let herself breathe, the cabin lights flickered briefly, then brightened again. A hush fell, a collective pause among the passengers sensing that something was about to happen. A flight attendant stepped forward, whispering hurriedly to Hargrove. He glanced at her, then gestured toward the galley entrance. "Ms. Thompson, please follow me back to your seat," he said. Aisha's stomach twisted. Back to the first-class cabin, back into the world of curious eyes, flashing phones, and judgmental whispers. She hesitated, uncertainty gripping her, but Hargrove's steady gaze offered reassurance. "I won't let them mistreat you. This will end correctly." As she walked behind him, the cabin erupted in murmurs once again. The whispers were louder now, a mixture of awe and skepticism. Some passengers leaned forward in their seats, phones poised. Cameras clicked discreetly. The sensation of being under scrutiny, magnified by every angle, felt almost unbearable. She had never imagined such attention could feel so invasive. Returning to her seat, Aisha was struck by a surreal scene. The plush first-class cabin had become a stage, every passenger a silent audience. Her seat felt simultaneously smaller and more exposed than ever. The luxurious leather, the wide armrests, the untouched comfort she had initially enjoyed, All of it now seemed like a fragile facade shielding her from the storm of observation. Hargrove gestured to the flight attendants, speaking quietly. "Ensure she has full privacy and comfort. No further interruptions. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," one replied, voice hesitant but respectful. Aisha sank into her seat, still trembling but holding herself upright, trying to reclaim the dignity that had been stripped from her moments ago. Hargrove remained nearby, giving a nod of reassurance, a silent promise that he had her back. But even with him present, she could feel the residual tension lingering in the cabin air, thick and unyielding. She took a deep breath, attempting to steady herself, when a ping sounded from her phone. A notification flashed on the screen. "Breaking news. Airline CEO intervenes mid-flight over passenger dispute." Her stomach dropped. Already the world was watching, and her private humiliation had become public spectacle. The video circulating online was grainy, shaky, but unmistakable, Aisha being escorted from her seat, passengers murmuring, phones raised. Comments flooded in, some sympathetic, some cruel, some incredulous. The realization hit her like a punch. This was no longer just about a first-class seat. This was about her story, her dignity, and the way it would be perceived by millions she would never meet. Hargrove's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "Ms. Thompson, I know this is overwhelming. I want you to focus on yourself right now. Let us handle the situation. You don't have to face this alone." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Yet, a flicker of doubt persisted. Could she truly trust someone from the very institution that had humiliated her? Could apologies, even personal ones from a CEO, undo the indignity of being publicly paraded? Before she could answer, a commotion arose from further back in the cabin. Passengers were whispering urgently, some craning their necks, others rising slightly from their seats. Aisha followed Hargrove's gaze and saw something that made her chest tighten in shock. Two men dressed in plain clothes but with an unmistakable air of authority were moving swiftly down the aisle. They spoke in hushed, urgent tones to the flight attendants, who nodded with worried expressions. Something about their presence felt official, significant, but opaque. Aisha swallowed hard. Her mind raced. Security, airline officials. What had her ordinary flight transformed into? She felt as if the world had tilted and gravity itself had become unreliable. Hargrove noticed her tension and leaned slightly closer. "Ms. Thompson, stay calm. Everything is under control, but you may want to prepare yourself. What happens next is unusual." Her pulse quickened. Unusual. Her entire flight had already been a nightmare of public scrutiny, humiliation, and confusion. How much more unusual could it get? Just then, a phone buzzed loudly from a nearby passenger's lap. The screen displayed a headline from a major news outlet. "Passenger removed from first-class seat. CEO intervenes mid-flight." Aisha's eyes widened as she realized the magnitude of what was happening. Her name, her face, her story. It was no longer contained to the cabin. It was already reaching the world. She glanced at Hargrove, who gave her a small, reassuring nod. "Ms. Thompson, you are not alone in this, but brace yourself. Things are about to move fast." Aisha's throat tightened. The plane, once a vessel of comfort and escape, now felt like a stage where every eye, every phone, every whisper mattered. The uncertainty, the public attention, the surrealness of having the CEO personally intervene, it all collided into a single, unignorable reality. This flight would change her life forever. And as the plane cruised over the vast landscape below, Aisha realized one undeniable truth. She was about to learn just how far someone in power would go to make things right, or just how deep the corporate machinery could fail her. And then, in the far corner of her peripheral vision, she saw a familiar face she never expected. A passenger whose presence would complicate everything, someone whose intentions were impossible to predict. Aisha's stomach dropped, her breath caught, her heart pounded louder than the engines beneath her. Who was that? And why did she feel deep down that nothing in this flight would ever be simple again? Aisha's eyes locked on the figure standing near the back of the cabin. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with an air that seemed both authoritative and familiar, though she couldn't immediately place him. His gaze flicked briefly in her direction, and the faintest hint of a smirk played across his lips. A jolt of recognition hit her, a pang of dread and confusion. Her mind raced. Who was he? Why was he on this flight? Why did her gut twist with a mixture of fear and anticipation? She instinctively took a small step back, but Hargrove's presence beside her provided a thin layer of reassurance. The man moved deliberately through the aisle, his eyes scanning the cabin as if calculating reactions, reading whispers, judging the mood. The passengers sensed it, too. Phones were subtly raised, cameras pointed, curiosity blazing in every eye. A hush fell, punctuated only by the low hum of the engines and the soft rustle of seatbelts. Hargrove's hand briefly brushed Aisha's shoulder. "Stay calm. Watch but don't engage. Let me handle this." Aisha's stomach knotted. She wanted to protest, to act, to assert control, but a small, instinctive part of her recognized Hargrove's wisdom. This wasn't the moment to challenge the unexpected presence. It was a moment to observe, to survive, and to understand. The man stopped mid-cabin, scanning the first-class passengers with a critical eye. He lingered, as if he had spotted someone or something that required his immediate attention, and then his gaze met Aisha's. Time seemed to slow. Aisha felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, amplified by the sudden tension that radiated from the man's stare. His expression hardened just enough to unsettle her, but not so much as to make him hostile, more like he was reading a story in her face, one she hadn't even told herself yet. Hargrove's voice cut through her anxiety, low but firm. "That's someone who's connected to this situation, Ms. Thompson. Someone who needs to hear your perspective, but carefully." "Connected? How?" Aisha's voice was barely a whisper, but her pulse quickened with a mix of apprehension and curiosity. Before Hargrove could answer, the man took another step forward. His eyes never left Aisha's. The cabin seemed to hold its breath, the usual comfort of first class suspended in a charged atmosphere of anticipation and fear. Suddenly he spoke, his voice smooth, deep, and carrying authority. "Ms. Thompson, I think we need to talk, now." A hush swept across the cabin. Even the flight attendants froze, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. The passengers' whispers grew louder, speculation and curiosity intertwining with unease. Phones angled subtly, capturing the unfolding drama as if the plane itself were a stage. Aisha's stomach twisted. She had already endured humiliation, scrutiny, and confusion. But now a new element had entered, a man who exuded power, influence, and a hint of something unspoken. She didn't know whether he was a threat, an ally, or something far more complicated. Hargrove stepped forward slightly, his hand raised as a gesture of reassurance. "Do not engage without me, but listen. He is part of why this escalated and part of how it will be resolved." Aisha felt a shiver run down her spine. Her chest tightened. She realized that this flight, already surreal, had grown exponentially more complex in a matter of minutes. What had begun as a simple seating dispute was now a convergence of corporate power, public scrutiny, and an unknown, possibly dangerous presence. The man took another deliberate step closer, his gaze locked on hers. "Miss Thompson," he said again, voice carrying over the murmurs of the cabin, "I know this is confusing, but you need to understand we are not here to harm you. Quite the opposite. You've already made an impression that requires attention at the highest levels." Aisha's brow furrowed. An impression. The weight of the moment pressed down on her like the cabin itself had become a crucible. She tried to steady herself, to summon the dignity that had been momentarily stripped away, but her hands trembled slightly as they rested on the leather armrests of her seat. "You," she began, but the words caught in her throat. How could she begin to understand what this man implied? How could she reconcile the public spectacle, the CEO's personal intervention, and now this mysterious figure's cryptic statements? Hargrove placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "You will have your answers soon," he said, his voice steady and calm. "For now, focus on yourself. Do not let the attention overwhelm you. We are managing the situation." Aisha nodded faintly, swallowing hard. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions. Who was this man? Why was he involved? What did he know about her or the incident, and why had he singled her out? The cabin had grown tense, silent in an almost unnatural way. Every whisper, every flash of a phone camera, every glance seemed to amplify the pressure around her. She felt as if she were both the protagonist and the unwitting subject of a story unfolding faster than she could comprehend. The man's gaze remained unbroken, and then he leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping just enough for only Aisha to hear. "What happened to you, it matters, and it will not be ignored." Aisha's breath caught. The words were simple, but their weight was immense. They hinted at recognition, accountability, and something larger, something she could not yet see, but which was about to reveal itself. Suddenly, the plane shuddered slightly as turbulence passed through the cabin, a jolt that made her heart race anew. It was a subtle reminder. Despite all the power, all the interventions, all the corporate authority and attention, they were still confined to the fragile, unpredictable reality of being thousands of feet above the ground. Aisha realized then that the storm surrounding her was far from over. The CEO's intervention, the mysterious man, the murmuring passengers, the cameras, all of it was only the beginning. Something deeper, more consequential, was about to unfold. And as the man stepped back, finally breaking eye contact, Aisha knew one thing with certainty. Her story had become larger than herself. The question that gripped her heart and mind, relentless and unyielding, was clear. Who was this man, and how far would he go to ensure that what happened to her was corrected or exploited? The plane settled into a steady altitude, but Aisha's stomach remained in knots. The cabin, once a haven of quiet luxury, had transformed into something more like a stage of judgment and curiosity. Every whisper, every subtle camera flash, and every sideways glance from passengers reminded her that this ordeal was no longer private. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes, most of them strangers, all witnessing what had become an unexpected spectacle. Hargrove remained close, a calm anchor amid the storm. His presence was reassuring, but Aisha couldn't shake the unease brought by the man in the aisle, the stranger whose cryptic words had unsettled her deeply. The two had exchanged only brief, measured glances, but those glances carried a tension she couldn't yet decipher. The man's attention now shifted subtly, scanning the cabin as if calculating the consequences of every action. He stopped in front of the galley, speaking quietly with a flight attendant, his tone urgent but controlled. Aisha caught fragments of their exchange, words like accountability, records, and executive review. Each phrase, each clipped syllable, sent a ripple of anxiety through her chest. Hargrove leaned in, whispering into her ear, "Stay calm. This man has authority over the investigation. He's here to ensure it's resolved correctly, but he can be unpredictable." "Unpredictable?" Aisha's voice trembled slightly. "How? I've already been humiliated in front of everyone. What more could happen?" Hargrove didn't answer directly. He simply gave her a firm nod, signaling that the moment demanded patience, not confrontation. Aisha tried to focus on her breathing, inhaling slowly, counting to 5, exhaling with deliberate intent. Yet the hum of the engines, the whispers, the flashing phones, it all combined into a symphony of tension that made it impossible to relax. She felt small, yet intensely visible, like a painting displayed under harsh gallery lights, every flaw amplified, every detail scrutinized. Then unexpectedly, the man began moving toward her seat. His strides were purposeful, measured, and deliberate. A hush seemed to sweep through the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, some whispering to each other, some recording the unfolding scene. Phones raised subtly, capturing angles, framing this new development like the opening of an unannounced act. Hargrove moved with him, keeping a subtle distance yet maintaining control of the space. "He's here to speak with you," Hargrove said quietly, voice low, yet carrying a weight of reassurance. "Listen carefully and answer honestly, nothing more." The man stopped directly in front of Aisha's seat. The cabin seemed to shrink, space condensing until it felt as if the two of them were alone, despite the hundreds of witnesses around them. He bent slightly, his voice low and precise. "Ms. Thompson," he began, his tone carrying a mixture of authority and something darker, an undercurrent of urgency that made her stomach twist. "What happened to you today is not just a simple mistake. It's part of a larger problem, one that has gone unnoticed for too long." Aisha's eyes widened. "A larger problem? What do you mean?" He glanced around briefly, then leaned closer, his voice a conspiratorial whisper that carried enough weight for her to hear clearly. "You've been caught in a system that doesn't always protect the right people, and in your case, someone wanted to see if you would be intimidated, if you would break." Aisha felt heat rise to her face, a mix of fear, humiliation, and anger. She swallowed hard, trying to process the words. "Intimidated, break, SHH, the man interrupted, his tone commanding but not unkind. "Not here, not now. You need to remain calm, but know this, your story matters, and the way it unfolds now will affect far more than just you." Hargrove placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He's right," he said. "This is bigger than a seat, bigger than a flight, but we're taking care of it, trust me." Aisha's mind spun. The humiliation, the whispers, the flashing cameras. She had been completely unprepared for any of this. And now she realized she was a central figure in something far more consequential, a story that could have implications she couldn't yet grasp. The weight of the unknown pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. Then the man straightened, his expression shifting from intensity to something more controlled. "Ms. Thompson," he said, voice low but carrying an unmistakable authority, "you're going to be given an opportunity to set things right, but it will require courage, clarity, and honesty. Are you ready?" Aisha's hands trembled slightly. She felt every eye on her, every whisper in the cabin, every camera pointed in her direction. The moment demanded more than composure. It demanded bravery she wasn't sure she possessed. Yet beneath the fear, a spark ignited, a determination not to be broken, not to let humiliation define her. She began, her voice quivering but steadying, "I'm ready." The man nodded once, sharply, then gestured subtly to the flight attendants. They moved quietly, clearing a small space around Aisha, ensuring she had a semblance of privacy amid the eyes of the cabin. Hargrove stepped closer, whispering again, "Remember, Ms. Thompson, your words, your composure, your courage, these are your tools. Use them wisely." Aisha took a deep, trembling breath. She glanced out the window at the endless sky, clouds painted in hues of gold and pink by the setting sun. For a fleeting moment, the beauty of the world outside the plane contrasted sharply with the tension within. She realized that this flight, this ordeal, had become a crucible, not just for humiliation, but for strength, resilience, and the power of her voice. And then, just as she was gathering herself, a sudden ping erupted from her phone, a message notification that made her heart stop. She glanced down. It was from an unknown number, the subject line stark. "We are watching. Don't make a mistake." Aisha's breath caught. Her pulse surged. The room seemed to tilt. The story she thought she understood, the CEO, the mysterious man, the airline drama, was far more complicated than she had imagined. The stakes were higher, the attention sharper, and the danger, whatever form it might take, undeniably real. Hargrove noticed her reaction and placed a firm, steadying hand on her arm. "Ignore it," he said, voice low. "Focus on the truth. Focus on yourself." Aisha nodded, swallowing hard, but the chill of the message lingered. Something was unfolding beyond the flight attendants, beyond the passengers, beyond even Hargrove's intervention. The world was no longer just watching her humiliation. It was testing her, daring her to rise, daring her to respond. And in that instant, Aisha understood one undeniable truth. She was no longer just a passenger on a plane. She was the center of a story that had the power to ignite outrage, empathy, and perhaps even justice. The question that burned in her mind, relentless and electrifying, was clear. Who had sent that message, and how far were they willing to go to control the narrative of her life? Aisha's hands trembled as she held her phone, the unknown message still glowing on the screen. "We are watching. Don't make a mistake." The words were stark, chilling, and yet impossible to ignore. Her pulse raced, and the cozy illusion of first-class luxury had long vanished, replaced by a tension so thick it seemed to press against her chest. Hargrove's hand rested on her shoulder, firm and steady, but even his calm presence couldn't erase the sense of vulnerability that surged through her. "Ignore it," he repeated quietly. "Focus on yourself. Focus on the truth." She nodded, swallowing hard. The truth. That was all she had now, a lifeline in a situation spiraling beyond comprehension. Every whisper, every subtle camera flash, every judgmental glance from passengers had made her realize just how publicly fragile she was. And yet, she also felt a flicker of determination. She would not let fear define her. The man, the mysterious figure whose presence had unsettled her since Part 4, stepped closer again. His gaze, intense and unreadable, seemed to pierce through every layer of composure she had painstakingly rebuilt. He spoke in a low, measured voice, intended only for her ears. "Ms. Thompson, the message you received. It's a warning, but it's also a test. How you respond in the next moments will determine the course of what happens next. Are you ready for that responsibility?" Aisha's breath hitched. Responsibility. This was no longer a flight. It was an arena, a test of her courage, her composure, and her ability to reclaim her dignity under impossible scrutiny. She could feel every eye on her, passengers who had shifted from curiosity to anticipation, all silently awaiting the unfolding drama. I'm ready," she whispered, voice trembling but determined. The man inclined his head, then stepped back slightly, allowing her to regain her space. Hargrove gave a small nod of approval. "Good. Now, Ms. Thompson, it's time to speak, to assert your position clearly, calmly, confidently. The world is listening, whether you realize it or not." Aisha exhaled, trying to steady herself. The cabin seemed to grow quieter, as if the air itself understood the gravity of the moment. Passengers leaned forward, some with phones poised, others merely watching, unaware that this was no longer a simple airline dispute. It was becoming a story of justice, dignity, and courage under pressure. The mysterious man's presence was still palpable, a shadow of authority hovering at the periphery of her awareness. Hargrove remained a stabilizing force beside her, but even his presence couldn't shield her from the intensity of every gaze, every whispered comment, every recording device quietly capturing her reaction. Then a flight attendant approached cautiously, lowering their voice. "Sir, the cabin is tense. Some passengers are reacting. Do you want us to intervene?" Hargrove shook his head slowly. "No, let it play out. She needs to take control of this moment. That's the point. Support, yes, but interference, no." Aisha's pulse quickened. Take control. She had never imagined that a simple first-class seat could become the center of such a high-stakes moment, but the words gave her a small anchor. She straightened in her seat, lifting her chin, allowing herself to claim a sliver of authority over the chaos surrounding her. Her gaze swept the cabin, briefly meeting a few passengers' eyes. Some looked skeptical, some curious, some empathetic. The flicker of human connection, even fleeting, gave her courage. She inhaled deeply, preparing to speak, not to defend herself, not to justify, but to assert her dignity and reclaim her narrative. Before she could speak, the mysterious man leaned slightly forward. "Ms. Thompson, there's more you need to understand," he said, voice low and urgent. "What happened today wasn't an isolated incident. You're part of a pattern, a series of failures that reached far beyond this flight. The people watching, the system that allowed it, they're all connected, and you have the opportunity to expose it." Aisha's stomach twisted. Expose it. The weight of the words hit her like a physical blow. Her pulse raced faster, adrenaline flooding her system. She realized the scope of what she had stumbled into. This wasn't merely about humiliation or first-class privileges. This was about accountability, corporate oversight, and a chance, perhaps the only chance, to demand justice. Hargrove placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "You have every right to be angry, every right to be afraid. But remember, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. You are stronger than you realize." Aisha's lips pressed together as she absorbed his words. The flickering tension in the cabin seemed almost cinematic now, as if the plane itself had become a stage, each passenger a silent witness to a story larger than any one individual. She realized she was standing at a crossroads: retreat into fear or rise into agency. Then the unexpected happened. A sharp chime from the cockpit echoed through the cabin. The intercom crackled. "Attention, passengers. Due to the unusual circumstances regarding Ms. Thompson, we ask that you remain seated and refrain from recording. The situation is being handled at the highest levels of the airline. Thank you for your cooperation." The words, broadcast to every corner of the plane, sent a wave of murmurs through the cabin. Phones were lowered, whispers hushed, and yet the intensity in the air remained. Aisha realized the entire flight had become a microcosm of public attention, every eye on her, every ear attuned to her actions. Her pulse steadied. She felt the first flicker of control. This was her moment to reclaim her narrative, to speak her truth, to confront the injustice she had endured. The mysterious man inclined his head slightly, as if granting permission. "Do it. Speak clearly, speak boldly. This is your chance." Aisha took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders, tempered by a surprising surge of resolve. The humiliation, the whispers, the cameras, they would not define her. Her voice would. Then, just as she began to speak, a sudden vibration ran through the plane, a sharp, unsettling jolt, different from normal turbulence. Passengers gasped, some gripping armrests, others clutching each other. The cabin lights flickered briefly, throwing shadows across tense faces. Aisha froze, heart hammering. The moment she had prepared for, speaking her truth, reclaiming control, was now compounded by a new, unpredictable element. The plane itself seemed to echo the turbulence of the situation she was navigating. And in that instant, a new, terrifying thought struck her. Whatever happened next, she had no guarantee of how it would end. The question now was no longer whether she could reclaim her dignity. It was whether she could survive the storm that had just begun. The jolt of the plane reverberated through the cabin like a physical punch, causing passengers to gasp and clutch armrests. Even the seasoned flight attendants exchanged quick, concerned glances. Aisha's heart hammered in her chest, adrenaline and fear coiling together in a tight knot. But amid the turbulence, a surprising clarity emerged. This was no ordinary flight, no ordinary situation. Every element, the CEO's personal intervention, the mysterious man, the murmuring passengers, the flashing phones, was converging towards something monumental. Hargrove's hand rested on her arm again, grounding her. His voice was steady, a tether in the chaos. "Stay focused, Ms. Thompson. This is the moment that matters. Don't let fear steal it from you." Aisha nodded, gripping the armrests of her luxurious seat as the plane rocked slightly. The cabin lights flickered again, painting shifting shadows across tense faces. She realized that the entire plane had become a microcosm of her struggle, public attention, power, fear, and agency intertwined in a complex, almost cinematic tapestry. The mysterious man moved closer again, his steps deliberate, almost predatory. He didn't speak immediately. He merely observed, as if measuring her readiness, calculating whether she had the composure to confront what was coming. His eyes, intense and unyielding, seemed to weigh every fraction of her reaction. Finally, he spoke, low enough for only her to hear. "Ms. Thompson, the turbulence isn't just mechanical. Someone is aware of this situation on the ground. They're trying to pressure you, intimidate you, to see if you'll falter under scrutiny." Aisha's stomach twisted. Pressure. Intimidation. She swallowed hard, realizing that what she thought had been a simple incident, a first-class seating error, was now clearly part of something much larger. She could feel it in the collective tension of the cabin, in the subtle glances exchanged among the staff, and in the way Hargrove's presence radiated both authority and urgency. "You have a choice," the man continued. "You can remain silent, let them control the narrative, or you can speak publicly, clearly, boldly, and reclaim your story." Aisha's pulse raced. Speak publicly. This was more than reclaiming a seat or demanding an apology. This was stepping into a spotlight, exposing injustice, risking further scrutiny and possibly retaliation. Yet beneath the fear, a fire ignited, a flicker of courage and determination she hadn't known she possessed. Hargrove leaned slightly closer, voice calm and steady. "Ms. Thompson, you are not alone. Speak your truth. They cannot define you if you control your narrative." Aisha took a deep, steadying breath. Her hands no longer trembled as violently. She lifted her chin, her eyes meeting those of the passengers around her. Some leaned forward in curiosity, others whispered nervously, and several raised their phones, cameras now recording the unfolding drama for the world beyond the cabin. The weight of observation was immense, but for the first time, she felt the possibility of power within it. She opened her mouth to speak, her voice firm yet measured, carrying across the first-class cabin. "I was removed from my seat today without cause, without explanation. I followed all procedures. I purchased my ticket like anyone else. What happened to me was wrong, and it should not happen to anyone else." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Phones clicked. Eyes widened. The moment she had feared, the public scrutiny, the judgment, the embarrassment, had transformed into something else: authority, agency, and undeniable presence. She realized that her voice was no longer merely defending herself. It was asserting her dignity, commanding attention, demanding accountability. The mysterious man's gaze softened slightly. Hargrove gave her a small nod of approval, as though confirming that she had passed an unspoken test. Aisha's pulse steadied, adrenaline now blending with a growing sense of empowerment. But before she could continue, the intercom crackled again. The captain's voice came over the cabin, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are aware of the unusual circumstances on board. The situation with Ms. Thompson is being handled at the highest levels. We appreciate your patience and cooperation." The words echoed across the cabin, amplifying the tension but also legitimizing her claims. The passengers shifted in their seats, some lowering their phones, others whispering among themselves. Aisha realized the world outside was beginning to take notice, and her story, her truth, was no longer hers alone. Then suddenly, a commotion erupted from the back of the plane. A passenger shouted something unintelligible, drawing the attention of the crew. The mysterious man's eyes flicked toward the disturbance, sharp and alert. Hargrove moved subtly to intercept, but Aisha felt a surge of panic. Her moment of empowerment was under threat. The man turned back to her, voice low but commanding. "Stay calm. You are doing this right. Do not let them disrupt you." Aisha nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She realized that the turbulence, the scrutiny, and even the unexpected disturbances were part of the test, an orchestration of pressure to see whether she could maintain composure under relentless observation. She inhaled deeply, letting the cabin's attention focus her mind rather than overwhelm it. She continued, voice steady, eyes blazing with resolve. "I will not be silenced. My dignity, my rights, and the respect of every passenger on this plane matter. This airline, its staff, and its leadership must be accountable, and I will ensure that this is corrected, not just for me, but for everyone who could be subjected to this injustice." The cabin fell silent. Even the hum of the engine seemed to pause. A palpable shift had occurred. Aisha realized that her words had transformed the moment. She was no longer a victim, she was a catalyst for change. Passengers whispered in admiration, some even nodding in solidarity. The cameras, once instruments of scrutiny, now documented empowerment. The mysterious man nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if confirming that she had embraced her role fully. Hargrove's hand tightened briefly on her shoulder, a subtle gesture of support, pride, and reassurance. And then, as the cabin absorbed the weight of her declaration, a sudden alert came from the cockpit. The intercom crackled urgently. "Attention passengers, we are diverting the flight for immediate security review. All remain seated. The situation requires swift action." Aisha's stomach dropped. Diversion, security review. The stakes had just escalated beyond her comprehension. The moment she had just seized, her voice, her empowerment, her courage, was now colliding with an unknown, immediate threat. Her chest tightened. The cabin buzzed with whispers, tension spiking higher than ever. The mysterious man's eyes met hers one final time, a silent warning, a promise, a challenge. Aisha realized, in that instant, that her journey was far from over, and that whatever awaited her on the ground would determine not just the outcome of this flight, but the fate of the story she had just begun to reclaim. And the question that haunted her as the plane began its slow, tense descent was unavoidable. What awaited her when the wheels touched the tarmac, and would she be ready for the truth waiting on the ground? The plane's wheels kissed the runway with a sharp jolt, the tires screeching against the tarmac. Aisha's pulse raced, her body still vibrating from the turbulence of emotion, scrutiny, and adrenaline she had endured mid-flight. She gripped the armrests tightly, bracing herself for whatever awaited on the ground. Every step, every glance, every whisper during the descent had been a rehearsal for this moment. But she knew instinctively, nothing could have fully prepared her for what was coming. The passengers remained tense but hushed, the previous curiosity and camera flashes replaced with a muted, anxious anticipation. They sensed that this was no ordinary landing, no ordinary flight. Something monumental was unfolding, and they were unwilling witnesses to history in the making. As the cabin doors opened, a small but highly visible contingent of airline executives, security personnel, and photographers waited. The unexpected presence of reporters made the scene feel like an orchestrated public spectacle. Aisha could hear murmurs ripple through the cabin, a mixture of awe, sympathy, and disbelief. Then she saw him, David Hargrove, the CEO, descending the mobile stairs onto the tarmac before her. His expression was serious, yet composed, his tailored suit and commanding presence impossible to ignore. But this time, it wasn't just corporate protocol guiding him. It was something personal. He had come not as a figurehead, but as a man determined to make right what had gone terribly wrong. Aisha's heart thumped in her chest. Fear, exhaustion, and disbelief collided with the flicker of empowerment that had carried her through the flight. She stepped forward, her strides careful but resolute, meeting Hargrove's gaze. "Ms. Thompson," he said, voice carrying across the tarmac yet calm and measured, "I owe you a personal apology, an apology I should have delivered the moment this began. What happened on that flight was unacceptable. You were humiliated. You were treated unfairly, and I take full responsibility." The words struck Aisha with an unexpected intensity. In all the chaos, in all the scrutiny, she had not anticipated this raw acknowledgement from the very top. There was no corporate script here, no rehearsed PR statement, just authenticity, accountability, and the weight of authority taking ownership of failure. She opened her mouth, ready to respond, when Hargrove raised a hand gently. "Please let me finish. You have a right to your dignity, and today we failed to protect it. We failed you. That will not happen again. I am personally committed to making this right, both for you and for every passenger who deserves respect." Aisha's throat tightened. Words failed her, but tears, long held at bay, threatened to spill. The whirlwind of emotions from the flight, the fear, humiliation, scrutiny, and newfound empowerment, culminated in this singular, transformative moment. She felt seen, acknowledged, and validated in a way she had not expected. Then came the most surprising part. Hargrove gestured slightly to the side, and the mysterious man from the flight, whose presence had both unnerved and guided her, stepped forward. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes carried a hint of approval. "Ms. Thompson," he said, voice calm but commanding, "you handled yourself with courage under pressure. You reclaimed your story when many would have faltered. That alone sets a precedent." Aisha's pulse quickened. She wanted to speak, to ask who he was, why he had been involved, but Hargrove shook his head gently, signaling that some answers would come later. For now, this acknowledgement, this rare, almost cinematic validation, was enough. The gathered passengers, still on the tarmac, began whispering among themselves. Cameras clicked, capturing the moment of reconciliation, the CEO's personal apology, and Aisha's composure after a day that had started in humiliation. The story that had begun in embarrassment was now transforming into one of empowerment and justice. Hargrove continued, turning to address the assembled media. "Today, we witnessed a situation that should never have occurred, but we also witnessed integrity, courage, and dignity. Ms. Thompson's experience will not be ignored. As CEO, I am personally committed to reviewing our policies, ensuring accountability, and guaranteeing that respect is always upheld, no matter the passenger." Aisha listened, absorbing the gravity of the moment. Her eyes scanned the crowd, passengers who had judged her, whispered about her, even filmed her. But now many were nodding subtly in solidarity. The narrative had shifted. She was no longer a subject of humiliation, but a symbol of resilience, courage, and the demand for accountability. Then unexpectedly, the mysterious man leaned toward her. "There's one more thing," he said, voice low, carrying just enough weight to pull her attention. "Your story, it doesn't end here. You've made an impact that will resonate far beyond this flight. But be prepared. Some may try to exploit it, others to silence it. Stay vigilant." Aisha's chest tightened. The warning stung, but it also solidified something within her. This was bigger than a flight, bigger than a first-class seat, bigger than any humiliation she had endured. She realized that her courage, her voice, and her composure had created a turning point, not just for her, but potentially for an entire system that had previously ignored accountability. Hargrove stepped closer again, offering a reassuring hand. "Ms. Thompson, thank you, truly. You've demonstrated strength, dignity, and resilience, and while this apology is personal, it represents our commitment to change." Tears spilled freely now, a mix of relief, validation, and catharsis. The humiliation that had dominated the flight dissipated, replaced by empowerment and the weight of recognition. Aisha inhaled deeply, letting the moment anchor her. She had survived scrutiny, intimidation, and fear, and emerged stronger, unbroken, and undeniably human. As she looked toward the gathered media, passengers, and airline executives, a sense of clarity washed over her. She had reclaimed her narrative, not through confrontation, but through courage and composure. She had transformed humiliation into dignity, fear into empowerment. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Aisha realized that her story, though it had begun in first-class chaos, had become something far greater. A story of resilience, accountability, and the power of one person standing firm under pressure. The crowd remained hushed, cameras capturing every moment, but Aisha no longer felt exposed. She felt in control. She felt recognized. She felt unstoppable. The question that had haunted her throughout the flight, the fear of exposure, judgment, and humiliation, was replaced by a quiet certainty. No matter what the world threw at her, She would face it with courage, dignity, and the unshakable knowledge that her voice, her story, and her integrity could not be taken from her. And in that moment, with the plane finally still, the tarmac beneath her feet, and the world watching, Aisha smiled. A small, fierce smile that spoke of triumph, resilience, and the undeniable power of being unapologetically herself.